I thought this morning I would share my recipe that I use for almost no knead bread. This loaf was inspired by a Cook's Illustrated article called Almost No Knead Bread, and also a recipe from Nancy Baggett's Kneadlessly Simple, a really helpful book. The recipe is as follows: 1 pound or 16 ounces of flour. Now you can use all-purpose flour if you'd like. I like to use a combination of half whole grain flour, either whole wheat, rye, or a combination of the two, and half bread flour. I use approximately 1 teaspoon of yeast. Now if you're using 100% whole wheat or whole grain flours, you'll probably need just a little bit more than that. And if you're using completely all-purpose flour, well, you can drop that back maybe to just over a half teaspoon of yeast. To begin with, go ahead and add your flours, add your yeast, and though it's not a part of my official recipe, I usually add a little bit of wheat germ, approximately 1/4 cup. Mix the dry ingredients so that the yeast is distributed throughout. Note that I'm not adding the salt yet. Add your liquid, either about 13 ounces of water or begin with a can of beer. Go ahead and start combining your dough, and because this is a no knead bread and most of the action is going to be done over time, you need to make sure there's plenty of liquid. And you'll notice here that this dough is pretty dry, not quite enough liquid. So we're going to add a little more water to it until it comes together and is just a little bit tacky. What I'm going to do is let this dough rest for about 10 to 15 minutes covered before I add the salt. That gives the proteins time to start forming more elastic bonds, which the salt actually inhibits. So go ahead and cover it with a tea towel, and we'll be back in 15 minutes. Okay, it's been 15 minutes, so let's take a look at it. So already we're starting to get some of the stretchiness that indicates the proteins or the gluten is beginning to form. I'm going to add about a teaspoon of salt here, just a little bit more because I like my bread to have some flavor. This is totally optional, but I really like some chopped fresh rosemary. You can't use dried because it'll cause the little bubbles from the yeast to burst. But some chopped fresh rosemary just smells fantastic. And then about 1/4 cup, maybe a little bit less, of chopped black olives. I'm using Kalamata. And you're just going to go ahead and start combining the dough together first, and then begin the kneading process. And kneading is really a matter of just taking the dough and pushing it out with the heel of your hand. Turn it over, push again, turn it and push. And we're going to do this approximately a dozen times. And this helps to build the gluten structure and the flavor a little bit. And you'll notice, you can see it's beginning to get kind of that stretchiness. Fantastic, that's just where we want it. So the next ingredient is thyme. The secret here is that you really need to let this dough sit for a long period of time. So I'm going to go ahead and actually place this in the refrigerator for the next 12 to 14 hours. Now you can either just cover this with plastic wrap, or if you really want a good airtight seal, find a plastic container to use. Take your dough, make sure you get all the pieces of olive, and just set it in there, and then give it just a light spray of cooking spray, not too much. If you're concerned about the moisture of the dough, you can add just a couple of more sprinkles of water, or if you've got a handy plant spray bottle, just give it a couple of squirts there. And then it's off to the refrigerator for the next 12 hours or so. Once or twice while it's sitting in the refrigerator, take it out and just give it a little bit of a twist. Pull it over, press it down, rotate 90 degrees, pull it over, press it down. You'll notice it's beginning to get even stretchier, and so that gluten development is happening automatically. Go ahead and give it a couple of more sprays if it feels a little bit dry, and back in for a few more hours. So it's now about 10:30 in the evening, and the dough has been sitting in the refrigerator for about 13 hours. And so it started to form a really nice texture. Hasn't increased in size significantly. So now it's time to take it out of the refrigerator and let it go through its first rise. The goal here is to have it about double in size. We don't want it to get through that process too quickly though, so what we're going to do is put it somewhere kind of cool. Okay, sleep tight. We'll see you in the morning. It's about 9 o'clock the next morning, so the dough has been in the process now for almost 24 hours. So let's take a look at it here. It's doubled in size, actually a little more than doubled. And so now it's ready to be shaped and then proofed. And proofing is the final rise. So let's go ahead and shape it, and then we'll let it double in volume again, and then we're ready to bake. So we're going to take the dough, and the first step is to go ahead and punch it down. And you don't want to punch in a too literal way, but see how we get these really big pockets of air? We don't want that in the final loaf. We want a fairly tight crumb. So we're going to go ahead and try to get some of the air out of it, break it down, and then we need to shape it. And to shape it, we're just going to take it and roll it over on itself kind of tightly. And by rolling it, we're creating some structure and layers so that when it rises in the oven, it'll pop up rather than as much out. A little more flour. And you can even tuck the ends over, get kind of an oblong shape. And then put it down. Okay, so the last thing we need to do is cover it just so that it doesn't dry out too much on the surface while it's rising. So a little bit of plastic wrap, and then just a little bit of spray to keep it from sticking because the surface of the dough is pretty tacky. Okay, take a look at this loaf. It's a little more than doubled in size, so it's ready to go in. We need to slash the loaf quickly, and you need to use a real sharp razor blade or a real sharp knife. Don't cut too deeply, you're just breaking the surface tension of the skin. And do this just right before putting it into the oven. This allows it to expand and not split randomly. Once the oven is ready and has reached about 450 degrees Fahrenheit or even a little bit warmer, go ahead and add some of the boiling water to a tray that's been placed at the bottom of the oven. You want to be careful when doing this. Next, go ahead and add the dough directly onto either a baking sheet or onto a preheated baking stone if you have one. You're going to bake the bread for about 50 minutes or so, or until it's golden brown on the outside and it's reached an internal temperature of about 210 degrees Fahrenheit. After about 10 minutes of baking, go ahead and lower the temperature of your oven to about 350 degrees Fahrenheit. This will go ahead and give you enough heat to finish baking, but will reduce the risk that the top will burn before the insides are cooked. Smells fantastic. Take a look at that. Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Go ahead and use an instant read thermometer through the bottom if you're concerned about aesthetics, or just through the top if you're not. And let's take a look at the temperature. And it is just coming in a little bit shy at about 208, just pushing towards 210, not quite there. I'm going to put it in for just a couple of more minutes. Wow, that is beautiful. Okay, now that we have this beautiful loaf out of here, we need to let it cool. This is the hardest part for me because when the bread comes out, it smells so good, I just want to cut it right open. But the inside's still cooking, and it will actually take an hour or so for it to cool down and for the inside to firm up completely. So resist the urge. Don't cut into the loaf right away.